The stagecoach lurched violently, throwing Sarah May against the worn leather seat. Her gloved hands clutched the small carpet bag that held everything she owned in this world. 2 dresses, a mother's Bible, and a letter that had brought her 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to this God-forsaken stretch of dust and sagebrush. Through the window, she watched the landscape roll by, endless plains broken only by scattered rocks and stubborn patches of prairie grass. The August sun beat down mercilessly, turning the inside of the coach into an oven. Sweat trickled down her spine, making the corset even more unbearable than usual. But she didn't loosen it. The tight garment served its purpose, keeping everything pressed flat, keeping her secret hidden. "First time out west, miss." The passenger across from her, a portly merchant with tobacco-stained teeth, had been trying to make conversation since Fort Laramie. "Yes," Sarah May replied, keeping her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. She turned back to the window, hoping he'd take the hint. But loneliness made men persistent in these parts. "Meeting your husband." The word made her flinch. "A prospect through correspondence." "Ah." The merchant nodded knowingly. "Lots of that these days. Not enough women out here for proper courting? Man gets desperate enough, he'll promise the moon in a letter." Sarah May's fingers found the letter in her pocket, worn soft from countless readings. William Hartley's words had seemed so sincere, so full of promise. A successful rancher. He'd said, looking for a good Christian woman to share his life, someone who valued character over beauty, substance over superficiality. She'd been naive to believe it all, perhaps, but after the fire, after the months of recovery, after the looks of pity and revulsion from people who'd once called themselves friends, what choice did she have no man in Philadelphia would have her now? Not when they knew. Not when they could see. The coach hit another rut, and Sarah May's hand instinctively went to her chest, pressing against the layers of fabric that concealed the worst of it. The scars on her arms were bad enough. Angry red marks that ran from wrist to elbow on her left side. Those she could explain away as a childhood accident. But the truth lay hidden beneath her corset. A twisted landscape of scar tissue that covered half her chest, a permanent reminder of the night her world had burned. She'd been helping at the charity hospital, tending to the poor during one of her church's missions of mercy. The fire had started in the kitchen, a knocked-over lamp. They said later, she'd gone back for the children, managed to get 3 of them out before the beam fell. The doctors called it a miracle she'd survived. Sarah May wasn't sure surviving was the miracle everyone claimed it to be. "Dusty Hollow coming up," the driver shouted from above. "Last stop before the Colorado line." Sarah May's stomach clenched. This was it, the end of the line, the place where William Hartley was supposed to meet her, to take her to his ranch, to start the new life he'd promised in his letters. The town materialized out of the heat shimmer like something from a fever dream. False front buildings lined a main street that was more dust than road. A few horses stood tied to hitching posts, their heads hanging low in the heat. Dogs slept in whatever shade they could find. The whole place looked like it might blow away in a strong wind. The stagecoach pulled up in front of what passed for a depot, a rough wooden platform beside a building that proclaimed itself to be Morrison's Freight and Stage Company. Sarah May gathered her courage and her carpet bag, accepting the driver's grimy hand as he helped her down. "Supposed to meet someone, miss?" the driver asked, already working to unload the cargo. "Yes, Mr. William Hartley. He said he'd be here." The driver paused, exchanged a look with the merchant who was climbing down behind her. "Hartley, you say?" "Yes. Do you know him?" "Can't say as I do. You might ask inside." The office of Morrison's Freight was dim and stifling. A thin man with sleeve garters looked up from a ledger as she entered. "Help you, miss? I'm looking for Mr. William Hartley. He was supposed to meet the stage." The clerk's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Hartley? No, can't say I know any Hartley hereabouts. You sure you got the right town? Dusty Hollow. That's what his letters said. Sarah May pulled out the most recent one, pointed to the words. See right here. The clerk barely glanced at it. Well, miss, I've been here 10 years and never heard of no William Hartley. You might want to check over at the hotel. Sometimes folks leave messages there. Sarah May felt the first tendrils of panic creeping up her spine. She'd spent nearly all her money on the passage. Had enough for maybe 2 nights at a hotel, if the rates weren't too dear. After that, the Dusty Hollow Hotel was a 2-story affair that had seen better days. The lobby smelled of old cigars and older dreams. The proprietress, a stern woman named Mrs. Baxter, confirmed what Sarah May was beginning to fear. No messages for you, dear, and no, I've never heard of any William Hartley neither. You say he's a rancher. I know every ranch within 50 miles, and there's no Hartley among them. The room tilted slightly. Sarah May gripped the edge of the counter. But the letters... Mrs. Baxter's expression softened a fraction. Wouldn't be the first time, dear, won't be the last. Some men get their amusement writing to lonely women back east, making promises they never intend to keep. It's a cruel sport, but there it is. I need a room, just for tonight, while I figure out what to do. That'll be $2, in advance. Sarah May counted out the bills with shaking fingers. That left her with exactly $3.47. Enough for one more night, maybe some food, and then... The room was small and airless, with a narrow bed and a washstand. Sarah May sat on the edge of the bed, still clutching her carpet bag, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. Stranded, abandoned, made a fool of by someone who probably laughed himself to sleep thinking of the desperate woman who'd believed his lies. She should cry. That's what women did in situations like this. But the tears wouldn't come. They'd dried up in the fire, perhaps, along with her faith in happy endings. A knock at the door made her jump. Yes. Mrs. Baxter sent up some water for washing. A young voice called. Sarah May opened the door to find a girl of perhaps 15 holding a pitcher. As she took it, the girl's eyes went wide, staring at the scars on Sarah May's arms where her sleeves had pulled back. Thank you, Sarah May said quietly, moving to close the door. Wait. The girl glanced down the hall, then leaned in conspiratorially. You're the lady asking about William Hartley? Yes. Do you know something? My PA says there was a fellow using that name a few months back. Stayed at the Riverside Ranch for a spell, working, but he got run off for... The girl colored. For bothering the rancher's daughter, making promises he shouldn't. Where is he now? Gone to California, last anyone heard, or maybe Denver. Point is, he's gone, and good riddance. The girl shifted the empty pitcher. I'm sorry, miss, you seem nice. It ain't fair what he done. After the girl left, Sarah May unpacked her few belongings. 2 dresses, one for traveling, one for best, the Bible, its pages singed at the edges, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, the packet of letters tied with ribbon, lies wrapped in pretty words. She walked to the window and looked out at Dusty Hollow. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her uncomfortably of fire. Somewhere out there, William Hartley was laughing at her gullibility. Somewhere back east, the people she'd once called friends were going about their lives, probably grateful she'd removed the embarrassment of her presence. And here she stood, Sarah May Fletcher, 26 years old, scarred and stranded, with $3 to her name and no prospects whatsoever. She could sell what little she had, maybe earn enough for passage back east, but to what? She'd burned those bridges as surely as the fire had burned her flesh. There was no going back to the pitying looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the suitors who suddenly remembered pressing business elsewhere when they glimpsed her scars. No, she'd come west to start over, and by God, that's what she'd do. Even if it wasn't the new start she'd imagined, even if it meant scrubbing floors or taking in washing or whatever work a scarred woman could find in a place like Dusty Hollow. Sarah May pulled the pins from her hair, letting the dark waves fall around her shoulders. In the cracked mirror above the washstand, she looked almost normal, almost like the woman she'd been before. As long as no one looked too close, as long as she kept her secrets hidden beneath layers of fabric and practiced smiles. Tomorrow, she'd figure out how to survive. Tonight, she'd allow herself just this moment of despair, alone in a shabby hotel room at the edge of the world, with nothing but her scars and her stubborn pride for company. Outside, Dusty Hollow settled into evening. The saloon down the street grew rowdy with cowboys spending their pay. Somewhere a dog barked. Life went on, indifferent to the tragedy of one more woman learning that the West was no place for fairy tales. Sarah May turned away from the window and began preparing for bed, moving carefully in the dim light. Each button undone was a small act of courage. Each layer removed brought her closer to the truth she'd have to face every day for the rest of her life. The scars were part of her now. The question was whether she could build a life that was more than just surviving them, whether somewhere in this hard, unforgiving land, she might find a place where her worth wasn't measured by the smoothness of her skin or the pity in people's eyes. It seemed unlikely, but then again, she'd believed in unlikely things before. Maybe that was her curse. Or maybe, just maybe, it might yet prove to be her salvation. The morning sun hit Main Street like a hammer on an anvil, already promising another scorching day. Sarah May stood on the hotel's narrow porch, her traveling dress freshly brushed but showing the wear of her journey. She'd eaten a meager breakfast of biscuits and coffee, 50 cents that hurt to spend but necessary if she was going to find work. Dusty Hollow in daylight was even less impressive than it had seemed yesterday evening. The buildings looked tired, their paint peeling and boards warping under the relentless sun. Tumbleweeds caught against fence posts and stairs, waiting for the next wind to carry them on. The whole town felt temporary, as if its residents were all just passing through on their way to somewhere better. But it was all she had now. Sarah May squared her shoulders and stepped into the street. First stop the general store, if nothing else. She could inquire about taking in mending or washing. Her mother had taught her fine needlework, and her stitches were still steady despite everything. The store's interior was dim and cluttered, shelves stocked with everything from flour to ammunition. Behind the counter stood a heavy-set man with mutton chop whiskers, eyeing her with a suspicious curiosity reserved for strangers. "Help you, miss?" "Good morning. I'm Sarah May Fletcher. I arrived yesterday and I'm looking for employment. I do fine sewing, mending, washing." "You're the one asking after that Hartley fellow." It wasn't a question. News traveled fast in small towns. "Yes, but that's behind me now. I need work." The shopkeeper, Mr. Morrison, according to the sign, sucked his teeth thoughtfully. "Don't have need for help here. Might try Mrs. Chen. She takes in laundry for the single men. Chinese camps on the other side of the tracks." Sarah May nodded, though she noticed how his eyes kept drifting to her covered arms. She'd worn her most modest dress, sleeves down to her wrists, despite the heat, but people had a way of sensing damage. "Thank you. Anywhere else you'd suggest?" "The saloon might need." He stopped, took in her respectable appearance. "No, I suppose not. There's the restaurant, Maggie's Place. She might need kitchen help." Sarah May tried Maggie's Place next. The proprietress, a raw-boned woman with kind eyes, listened to her request while wiping down tables. "I'd like to help you, dear, but I've got my niece working for me now. Times are lean. Nobody's hiring unless they absolutely have to." Maggie paused, studying Sarah May with a practiced eye. "You came out here for a man who didn't exist, didn't you?" "Is it that obvious?" "Honey, you're not the first and won't be the last. Town sees a couple like you every year. Most either find a real husband quick or head back east with their tails between their legs." "I can't go back." Something in Sarah May's tone made Maggie stop wiping. Can't or won't. Does it matter? I suppose not. Maggie wrung out her cloth. Listen, there's a widow outside town. Mrs. Eleanor Hutchins lost her husband last winter. She's been trying to keep their place going, but it's hard for a woman alone. Might be she could use help, even if she can't pay much. Where would I find her? About 3 miles north. Follow the creek. White house with green shutters, or what used to be green. Maggie hesitated. You can walk it, but it's a fair piece in this heat, and, well, you'll pass by the saloon and the stockyards. Men there ain't always respectful to a woman alone. I'll manage. Sarah May left the restaurant with directions and a warning. The morning was advancing, the heat already oppressive. 3 miles. She could walk 3 miles. She'd survived worse than a walk in the heat. Main Street petered out into a dusty track heading north. Sarah May adjusted her bonnet and started walking. The few people she passed, farmers in town for supplies, cowboys heading to the stockyards, watched her with open curiosity. A woman alone, walking out of town, was unusual enough to warrant attention. She'd gone perhaps half a mile when she heard the comment start. Well, looky here, boys. Ladies out for a stroll. 3 men lounged outside the saloon, even though it wasn't yet noon. Cowboys, by the look of them, already well into their cups. Mighty hot for walking. Miss, why don't you come sit a spell? Sarah May kept walking, eyes forward, pace steady. Don't engage, don't react, just keep moving. Aw, she's too good for us. Boys, must be one of them Eastern ladies, all proper like. Bet she ain't so proper. Walking alone, no escort. Proper ladies don't do that. One of them, younger than the others, with a mean cast to his features, pushed off from the wall. Hey, I'm talking to you, lady. Sarah May quickened her pace, but he was faster, stepping into her path. The smell of whiskey and old sweat made her stomach turn. That ain't polite, ignoring a man when he's being friendly. Please step aside. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Please step aside. He mimicked in a high voice. His friends laughed. What's your hurry? We don't see ladies often. Just want to talk. Let me pass. Or what? He reached for her arm. Yo. There a problem here? The voice came from behind Sarah May, deep and calm, but with an edge that made the cowboy's hand freeze mid-reach. She turned to see a man on horseback, sitting easy in the saddle despite the tension in the air. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and clothes that marked him as a working cowhand-worn chaps, faded shirt, a hat that had seen better decades. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray as a winter sky and just as unforgiving as he stared down the drunk cowboy. No problem. Caleb, just being friendly to the lady. Doesn't look like she wants your friendship. Jake. Jake's face flushed red. Ain't none of your business. I'm making it my business. The man called Caleb shifted slightly in his saddle, a movement that somehow made him seem larger, more dangerous. You boys best get back to your drinking. Leave the lady be. There was a moment when Sarah May thought violence would erupt. Jake's hand hovered near his gun, his friends tensing behind him. Then one of them, older and apparently more sober, grabbed Jake's shoulder. Come on, not worth it. Jake spat in the dust near Sarah May's feet, but he backed away. This ain't over, Caleb. It is as far as the lady's concerned. The 3 cowboys retreated to the saloon, throwing dark looks over their shoulders. Only when the door swung shut behind them did the man on horseback turn his attention to Sarah May. You all right, ma'am? Yes, thank you. He dismounted in one smooth motion, though he kept a respectful distance. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd first thought. Lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. His clothes were clean, but patched. The gear of a man who worked for wages rather than owning his own spread. John Caleb, he said, touching the brim of his hat. You shouldn't be walking alone out here. I don't have a choice. I need to find work." He studied her for a moment, taking in her Eastern dress, her careful posture, the way she held herself apart. "You're the lady came in on yesterday's stage, looking for someone who wasn't there. Did everyone in town know her business?" "Yes." "Where you headed?" Mrs. Hutchins' place. I was told she might need help." John Caleb frowned. "That's another 2 miles. And the sun's getting higher. You'll burn up in that dress." "I'll manage." Stubborn, it wasn't quite a criticism. "I'm headed that way. You can ride." Sarah May looked at his horse, then at him. Accepting help from a stranger went against everything she'd been taught, but the sun was brutal, and she could already feel sweat soaking through her corset. "That's kind, but I couldn't impose." "It's not imposing. I'm going there anyway. Eleanor asked me to look at a fence that needs mending." He paused. "Unless you'd rather walk past the stockyards alone. Gets pretty rough down there when they're moving cattle." Pride warred with practicality. Practicality won. "Thank you, Mr. Caleb." He helped her mount, his hands careful and impersonal at her waist. She settled sideways on the saddle, grateful her skirts were full enough to maintain modesty. He swung up behind her, keeping space between them as he took the reins. They rode in silence at first, the horse's steady gait eating up the distance. Sarah May was acutely aware of him behind her, the warmth of another human being, the quiet competence in how he handled the horse. "You always rescue women from drunken cowboys?" she asked, needing to break the silence. "Only on Tuesdays." She turned, surprised, and caught what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Is it Tuesday?" "Might be. Hard to keep track out here." Despite everything, Sarah May felt her lips twitch. "Well then, good timing." They passed the stockyards, where the noise and smell of cattle filled the air. Cowboys whistled and shouted, moving the beasts into pens. A few looked up as they passed, but none commented. John Caleb's presence was apparently enough to ensure safe passage. "How long have you been in Dusty Hollow?" she asked. 4 years, give or take. Came up from Texas with a herd, decided to stay. "Why?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Got tired of drifting. Wanted a place to light for a while." "And you chose here?" "It chose me. More like horse went lame. Had to stop. By the time he healed, I'd found work. Been here since." The Hutchins place appeared ahead, a small white house with shutters that had once been green. Just as Maggie had described, a vegetable garden struggled against the heat, and chickens pecked in the yard. It looked tired but cared for, like someone was fighting hard to keep decay at bay. John Caleb helped her down, his hands leaving her waist the moment her feet touched ground. "Eleanor's good people," he said quietly. "Fair. She's had a hard time since Tom died. Thank you for the ride, and for earlier." He touched his hat brim again. "You need anything, you send word. I work at the Double Bar Ranch, about 5 miles west. They know where to find me." He mounted and rode off without waiting for a response, leaving Sarah May standing in the dusty yard. She watched him go, then turned toward the house. Through the window, she could see movement, the widow Hutchins, presumably going about her daily work. Sarah May straightened her dress, adjusted her bonnet, and walked to the door. Whatever happened next, at least she'd made it this far. She'd faced down drunk cowboys and accepted help from a stranger and survived to knock on this door. It wasn't much of a victory, but in a life that had recently been short on victories of any size, she'd take it. The door opened before she could knock. A woman in her 40s stood there, graying hair pulled back severely, face weathered but not unkind. Her dress was as patched as John Caleb's shirt, but clean and neat. "You'd be the Eastern lady looking for work." It wasn't a question. "John Caleb sent word you might be coming." He did. "Stopped by earlier, mentioned you might head this way, said you seemed determined." Mrs. Hutchins stepped aside, Come in out of the heat. We'll talk." Sarah May entered the small house, grateful for the shade. Whatever John Caleb had said, it had opened this door. She owed him for that, though she suspected he was the sort of man who kept no tally of such debts. Through the window, she could see his figure growing smaller in the distance, heading back toward town. A quiet man who'd appeared when needed and left without fanfare. In her experience, such men were rare. But she couldn't afford to think about that now. She had a position to secure, a life to build from nothing. The fairy tale was over. Now came the hard work of reality. Mrs. Hutchins' kitchen was sparse but clean, with herbs drying from the rafters and a wood stove that radiated heat even though no fire burned. Sarah May sat at the scrubbed pine table, grateful for the glass of cool water the widow had provided. "I can't pay much, Mrs." Hutchins said without preamble. "Room, board, and $2 a week. The work's hard. Cooking, cleaning, tending the garden, helping with the chickens and the cow. Tom and I never had children, so it's just me now. I'm not afraid of hard work." "Your hands say different." The older woman's eyes were sharp. "Those are city hands. You ever milked a cow, wrung a chicken's neck, scrubbed lye soap into rough boards until your knuckles bled?" "No, but I can learn." Mrs. Hutchins studied her for a long moment. "What are you running from, girl?" Sarah May's hand went instinctively to her covered arms. "Does it matter?" "Might. I don't need trouble following you to my door." "There's no trouble. No angry husband. No family looking for me. I came west to marry a man who didn't exist. Now I need work. It's as simple as that." "Nothing's ever that simple." But Mrs. Hutchins seemed satisfied. "You can have the lean-to room off the kitchen. It's small, but it's private. You'll start tomorrow. Earlier if you're willing. There's bread that needs baking and eggs to gather." "I can start now." A ghost of a smile crossed the widow's weathered face. "Eager, that's good. You'll need that eagerness when you're up before dawn to milk Bessie." Sarah May spent the rest of the day learning the rhythms of the house. Mrs. Hutchins was a patient teacher but expected quick learning. The garden needed constant attention in the heat. Water carried bucket by bucket from the well. Weeds pulled before they could steal precious moisture. The chickens were mean-spirited creatures that pecked at her hands when she reached for eggs. The cow, Bessie, was placid enough but required a technique Sarah May couldn't quite master. "You're strangling her teat, not milking it," Mrs. Hutchins observed, gentle but firm, like this. By evening, Sarah May's hands were red and sore. Her back ached, and her dress was stained with dirt and sweat. But she'd gathered eggs without losing a finger, helped prepare a simple meal of beans and cornbread, and even managed to get a small stream of milk from Bessie. The lean-to room was indeed small, barely larger than a closet, with a narrow cot and a single shelf, but it had a door that closed and a tiny window that looked out over the prairie. After weeks of uncertainty, it felt like a palace. "You did well today," Mrs. Hutchins said as they cleaned up after supper. "Better than I expected, but one day doesn't make a pattern. We'll see how you do when the novelty wears off." That night, Sarah May lay on the narrow cot and listened to the unfamiliar sounds, coyotes howling in the distance, the wind rattling the windows, the house settling around her. Her hands throbbed, and muscles she'd forgotten she had protested every movement. But for the first time since the fire, she'd gone a whole day without anyone staring at her scars or treating her like broken goods. The days fell into a routine. Up before dawn to milk Bessie, breakfast to prepare, eggs to gather, endless chores that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. Mrs. Hutchins was fair but exacting, teaching Sarah May the dozen skills needed to keep a frontier household running. "Tom built this place with his own hands," she said one evening as they mended clothes by lamplight. "Every board, every nail. Said he was building something that would last. You must miss him. Every day, but missing don't get the work done." She examined Sarah May's stitching. nodded approval. "You sew well. Those are lady stitches." "My mother taught me. She said a woman's worth could be measured in the evenness of her needlework." "Your mother sounds like a fool." The blunt words startled Sarah May. "A woman's worth is in her spine, not her stitches, though good stitches don't hurt." They worked in companionable silence after that. Sarah May found herself relaxing in the older woman's presence. Mrs. Hutchins didn't pry, didn't stare, didn't offer unwanted sympathy. She simply expected work and gave respect in return. It was the end of her first week when John Caleb appeared again. Sarah May was in the garden, fighting a losing battle with potato beetles. When she saw him riding up, he dismounted at the gate, removing his hat as Mrs. Hutchins came out to greet him. "John, come about that fence." "Yes, ma'am. Brought the wire you needed." "Good. Sarah May, show him where the break is. Past the chicken coop, near the creek." Sarah May straightened, painfully aware of her dirt-stained dress and the hair escaping from her bonnet. "Of course." She led him around the house, conscious of his quiet presence behind her. The fence break was obvious, a section where the posts had rotted and fallen, leaving a gap large enough for coyotes or worse to get through. "Been meaning to fix this since spring," John said, surveying the damage. "Eleanor's too proud to ask for help." "She seems quite capable on her own." "She is, but everyone needs help sometimes." He glanced at her, then away. "How are you settling in?" "Well enough. The work is hard, but Mrs. Hutchins is a good teacher." "And the town anyone else bothering you?" Sarah May thought of her weekly trip to town for supplies, the whispers that followed her, the way conversations stopped when she entered the store. "Nothing I can't handle." He made a noncommittal sound and set to work on the fence. Sarah May knew she should go back to her chores, but found herself lingering. There was something restful about watching him work, the easy competence, the way he didn't feel the need to fill the silence with chatter. "Why did you tell Mrs. Hutchins I was coming?" she asked finally. He paused in his work. "Seemed like you needed a chance. Eleanor needed help. Made sense to mention it. You didn't know anything about me. I could have been a thief or worse." "Could have been." He tested the tension on the wire. "But you weren't." "How could you know that?" He straightened, looked at her directly for the first time since arriving. "You were scared, but not desperate. Desperate people have a different look. You were just determined." The observation was too perceptive, too close to the truth. Sarah May looked away. "I should get back to work." "Miss Fletcher," his voice stopped her. "That offer stands. You need anything, you send word." She nodded without turning around and hurried back to the house. Mrs. Hutchins was kneading bread dough, her movements practiced and rhythmic. "John's a good man," she said without preamble. "Lost his wife and child to fever 5 years back. Doesn't talk about it, but it's there in his eyes if you know how to look." Sarah May said nothing, focusing on the vegetables she was supposed to be preparing for supper. "And he doesn't offer help lightly," Mrs. Hutchins continued. "Man like that, when he says he'll be there, he means it." "I barely know him." "Sometimes that doesn't matter. Tom and I knew we'd marry the day we met. Took us 3 years to get around to it, but we knew." She shaped the dough into loaves with practiced hands. "Not saying it's like that with you and John, just saying that out here. You learn to read people quick. Have to survive." That night, Sarah May stood at her tiny window and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, John Caleb was probably finishing his day's work, heading to whatever bunkhouse or room he called home. A man who'd lost everything and kept going. A man who offered help without expecting anything in return. She touched the scars on her arm through the fabric of her nightgown. In Philadelphia, she'd been marked, damaged, someone to be pitied or avoided. Here, she was just another person trying to survive. The scars were still there, still hidden, but they didn't define every interaction. Not yet, anyway. She knew that would change if anyone discovered the truth. The scars on her arms were bad enough, but they could be explained, minimized. What lay beneath her corset was different. No man could see that and still want her. She'd accepted that truth months ago. But for now, in this small room in this tired house at the edge of nowhere, she could pretend otherwise. She could be Sarah Mae Fletcher. Hired hand, capable woman, person of worth beyond her damaged skin. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more small victories and defeats. But tonight, she had a roof over her head, honest work for her hands, and the memory of gray eyes that saw her fear but not her shame. It was more than she'd had a week ago, in a life recently stripped of expectations. That was enough. The coyotes howled again, closer this time, and Sarah Mae shivered. The frontier was no place for fairy tales. Mrs. Hutchins had said, but perhaps it was a place for something else, for people broken by life to find new purpose, for worth to be measured in work rather than appearance, for quiet men to offer help without judgment. Not a fairy tale, just a chance, and for now, a chance was all she needed. September gave way to October, and the brutal heat finally began to ease. Sarah Mae had been at the Hutchins place for nearly 6 weeks now, her hands no longer city-soft, her movements around the house and garden confident. The lean-to room had become home in a way she hadn't expected, its sparse furnishings supplemented with small touches, wildflowers in a jar, a quilt, Mrs. Hutchins had helped her piece together from scraps. "I need to go to town tomorrow," Mrs. Hutchins announced one evening. "Doctor's orders. This cough isn't getting better on its own." Sarah Mae looked up from her mending. Concerned, the widow had been coughing for days, though she'd brushed off any suggestion of rest. "I'll come with you." "No need. Someone has to mind the place. Besides, Doc Harwood will likely want to keep me there a day or two." She waved off Sarah Mae's protest. "I've already arranged it. John Caleb will check in. Make sure you're managing." The name sent an unwelcome flutter through Sarah Mae's stomach. She'd seen him only a handful of times since that first week, when he came to finish the fence, once at the general store, and last Sunday at the small church service held in the schoolhouse. Each time, he'd been polite but distant, touching his hat brim and inquiring after her health before moving on. "That's not necessary. I can manage alone." Mrs. Hutchins gave her a look that suggested otherwise. "A woman alone out here is a target. You'll have protection, like it or not." The next morning, Sarah Mae helped Mrs. Hutchins into the wagon she'd hired for the trip to town. The older woman looked frailer than usual, the coughing fits having taken their toll. "There's bread dough rising," Mrs. Hutchins instructed. "Don't forget to punch it down. The cow." "I know." Sarah Mae squeezed her hand. "I've been doing this for 6 weeks. Rest and get better." After the wagon disappeared down the road, Sarah Mae threw herself into the day's work. There was comfort in routine, in tasks that had become familiar. She'd just finished the noon milking when she heard horses approaching. Her stomach dropped. Mrs. Hutchins had said John would check in, but she'd assumed that meant a brief visit, perhaps at a distance. Instead, he was dismounting at the gate, and he wasn't alone. A younger man, barely more than a boy, remained mounted. "Miss Fletcher," John touched his hat. "This is Danny. He'll be staying in the barn for a few days, keeping watch." "That's not necessary." "It is." His tone was mild, but final. "Eleanor asked, and I promised. Danny's reliable. He won't bother you." The boy Danny tipped his own hat. He couldn't have been more than 17, with the gangly look of someone not quite grown into his height. "Ma'am, I'll just bed down with the horses. You won't even know I'm here." Sarah Mae wanted to protest further, but something in John's expression stopped her. There was a watchfulness there, a tension she hadn't seen before. "Has something happened?" she asked quietly. John glanced at Danny, then back to her. "Jake Thornton's been making noise, drinking more than usual, talking about teaching uppity Eastern women their place. Probably nothing, but better safe than sorry." Sarah May's mouth felt dry. She remembered Jake, the drunk cowboy from her first week. "I see. I'll be back to check on things this evening." John moved toward his horse, then paused. "You know how to use a shotgun?" "No." "There's one in the house. Eleanor keeps it loaded. Point and pull the trigger if you need to. Danny will be close, but it's good to be prepared." He left without waiting for a response. Sarah May stood in the yard, watching the dust settle, trying to quiet the fear that had sprung to life at his words. She'd thought that incident forgotten, Jake's threats merely the bluster of a drunk. Apparently not. "Ma'am." Danny had dismounted and stood awkwardly by the barn. "I'll just get settled, if that's all right. Won't be any trouble." "Of course. There's fresh bread if you're hungry later." The afternoon passed slowly. Sarah May went about her chores, aware always of Danny's presence in the barn. It should have been comforting. Knowing protection was near, instead, it made her feel exposed, vulnerable, a reminder that she wasn't safe here, might never be safe anywhere. She was gathering eggs when she heard horses again, multiple horses, moving fast. Her heart hammered as she peered around the chicken coop. 3 riders were approaching, and even at a distance, she recognized Jake Thornton's slouched posture. Danny emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. "Get in the house, ma'am." Sarah May didn't argue. She ran for the kitchen door, latching it behind her. Through the window, she could see Danny standing between the house and the approaching riders, young but steady. "That's far enough," Danny called out. Jake and his companions, the same 2 from that first day, pulled up just outside the gate. Well, Eleanor's got herself a guard dog. Turn around and ride on. Jake, nothing for you here. Just wanted to pay my respects to the lady. Heard she's living here now, working like common folk. Shame to see quality brought so low." Sarah May's hands clenched on the windowsill. Through the thin walls, she could hear every word. "Must have been something real bad to send her running out here," Jake continued. "Got me curious. What kind of woman can't find a husband back east? Maybe she's not as proper as she pretends." "Maybe you should mind your own business," Danny said. Jake laughed, ugly and mean. "Boy, you better watch that mouth. Wouldn't want you to have an accident." "Is that a threat?" "Just friendly advice." Jake's voice turned speculative. "Where is she anyway? Inside hay, lady. Why don't you come out and be sociable?" Sarah May pressed her back against the wall, heart pounding. The shotgun misses. Hutchins had mentioned was propped in the corner. She'd never fired a gun in her life, but the weight of it in her hands was reassuring. "Time to go, Jake." A new voice, deeper and carrying authority. Sarah May peered out to see John Caleb riding up fast, 2 other men with him. "You're trespassing." "Caleb." Jake's voice lost some of its swagger. "Didn't expect to see you." "Eleanor asked me to look after her place. That includes running off trash." John positioned his horse between Jake and the house. "You've been warned before about harassing women. Next time, we skip the warning." There was a long, tense moment. Sarah May could see Jake's hand hovering near his gun, could feel the violence hanging in the air like smoke. Then one of Jake's companions muttered something, and the tension broke. "This ain't over," Jake said, but he was already turning his horse. "Yes, it is." John's voice was flat, final. "You come near this place again, you'll answer to me. And if I'm not around, you'll answer to Mr. Colt here." He patted his sidearm meaningfully. Jake and his friends rode off, throwing curses over their shoulders. Only when they were out of sight did Sarah May realize she was shaking. John dismounted and came to the door. You all right? She opened it with trembling fingers. Yes, thank you. His eyes took in the shotgun she still held. You know how to use that? You asked earlier. The answer is still no. Tomorrow I'll teach you. He looked tired suddenly, older than his years. Men like Jake, they're cowards at heart. Stand up to them once, they usually slink away. But sometimes they need more than one lesson. Will he come back? Maybe. Probably not. But Danny will stay close for a few days. Just in case. He studied her face. You could leave. Head to Denver or San Francisco. Start over in a real city. With what money and to do what? Sarah May set the shotgun carefully aside. I'm no worse off here than I'd be anywhere else. Eleanor's lucky to have you. Not many would stick it out. I don't have the luxury of other choices. Mr. Caleb. Something shifted in his expression. John. Just John is fine. The intimacy of first names felt dangerous, but she nodded. John, then. He left shortly after, taking his companions with him, but leaving Danny on guard. Sarah May went through the motions of evening chores, but her mind kept circling back to Jake's words. What kind of woman couldn't find a husband back east? What was wrong with her? He didn't know, couldn't know, but the questions hit too close to her truth. That night, she lay awake listening to every sound. Danny was out there, protection against immediate threats. But who would protect her from the slower danger, the questions, the speculation, the gradual unveiling of her secrets? She pressed her hand against the scars hidden beneath her nightgown. In the darkness, she could almost forget they were there, almost imagine she was whole, undamaged, worthy of the concern John had shown. But morning always came, and with it, reality. She was a scarred woman hiding in a widow's lean-to, protected by the kindness of strangers from men who sensed her vulnerability like wolves scenting wounded prey. Still, she'd stood in that kitchen with a shotgun in her hands, ready to defend herself. That was something. Maybe not much, but something. Outside, a coyote howled, and Danny's horse nickered in response. Sarah May closed her eyes and tried to find sleep. Tried not to think about gray eyes and quiet competence, about first names spoken like gifts. Tomorrow, John would teach her to shoot. It was a practical thing, a necessary skill for a woman alone on the frontier. Nothing more than that. But in the darkness, with fear and loneliness her only companions, she allowed herself to imagine it might be something else, a sign that someone thought her worth protecting, worth teaching, worth the effort. Foolish thoughts, dangerous thoughts, but in the long hours before dawn, she held them close anyway. Talismans against the dark. True to his word. John arrived the next morning with an old but well-maintained rifle. Sarah May had barely finished the breakfast dishes when she heard his horse, Danny, who'd spent a quiet night in the barn, greeted him with obvious relief. Any trouble? John asked the boy. No, sir. Quiet as a grave. Good. You can head back to the ranch. Tell Mr. Morrison I'll be along directly. Sarah May met them in the yard, wiping her hands on her apron. In the morning light, she could see the weariness around John's eyes more clearly. You didn't need to come. I'm sure you have work. Made a promise. He lifted the rifle from his saddle. This is easier to handle than that scattergun Eleanor keeps. Better for learning. They walked out past the vegetable garden to where the land opened up. John had brought a flour sack filled with sand and set it on a fence post as a target. The morning was cool, autumn finally asserting itself after the long summer. First thing, John said, handling the rifle with the casual competence of long familiarity. Respect the weapon. Always assume it's loaded, even when you know it's not. Never point it at anything you don't intend to shoot. Sarah May nodded, trying to focus on his words rather than the way his hands moved over the rifle, sure and steady. He showed her how to load it, how to sight down the barrel, how to brace it against her shoulder. It'll kick, he warned. Don't fight it. Let your body move with it. The first shot went wild, the recoil surprising despite his warning. Sarah May stumbled back, ears ringing. Again, John said simply. The second shot was better. By the fifth, she actually hit the edge of the flour sack. A small victory. But John nodded approval. You learn quick. I have a good teacher. Something flickered in his eyes before he looked away. Load it again. Practice makes permanent. They worked for another hour, until Sarah May's shoulder ached and her ears rang despite the cotton John had given her to stuff in them. But she could hit the target more often than not now, and the rifle no longer felt alien in her hands. That's enough for today, John said finally. You know the basics. Rest is just practice. They walked back toward the house in companionable silence. Sarah May was acutely aware of him beside her, the space he took up, the way he moved with an economy that spoke of hard work and harder times. Can I offer you coffee? She asked as they reached the porch. It's the least I can do. He hesitated, and she thought he'd refuse. Then, that'd be welcome. The kitchen felt smaller with him in it. Sarah May busied herself with the coffee pot, conscious of his presence at the table. Neither spoke until she'd poured 2 cups and sat across from him. Jake won't be bothering you again, he said abruptly. Sheriff ran him out of town this morning. Seems he got drunk and shot up the saloon last night. Final straw. Oh. Sarah May didn't know whether to feel relieved or worried. Men like Jake didn't forget grudges easily. He's Texas-bound. From what I hear, good riddance. They drank their coffee in silence. Sarah May found herself studying him over the rim of her cup, the premature gray in his hair, the sun-weathered skin, the careful way he held himself, as if ready to move at any moment. Mrs. Hutchins said you lost your family, she heard herself say, then immediately wished the words back. I'm sorry. That's none of my business. It's all right. He stared into his coffee. 5 years ago, fever took them both in the same week. My wife, Mary, our daughter, Rose. She was 3. The pain in his voice was carefully controlled but still present, like a wound that had scarred over but still ached in bad weather. Sarah May knew that kind of pain intimately. I'm sorry, she said again, inadequately. It was a long time ago. He looked up at her then. You learned to carry it. Like anything else. She thought of her own losses. Not death, but the life she'd known, the future she'd planned. All gone in flames. Yes, you learned to carry it. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that needed no words. They'd both been marked by loss, changed by it. It was there in the careful way they moved through the world now, protecting themselves from further harm while still going through the motions of living. John finished his coffee and stood. I should go. Ranch work doesn't wait. Thank you for the lesson, for everything. He paused at the door. Eleanor should be back tomorrow, but if you need anything before then, I know where to find you. After he left, Sarah May stood in the empty kitchen, feeling strangely bereft. The rifle leaned in the corner, a reminder of the morning's lesson. She picked it up, checking that it was unloaded as he'd taught her, then sighted down the barrel at an imaginary target. She could defend herself now, at least in theory. It was a small thing, but it made her feel less helpless, less dependent on the kindness of others. The rest of the day passed quietly. Sarah May went about her chores with new awareness of the rifle's location, of the skills John had taught her, of the way her body remembered the kick of the gun and adjusted for it. She was changing out here, becoming someone harder, more capable, someone who could survive. That evening, as she prepared her simple supper, she thought about John's wife and daughter, Mary and Rose. She tried to imagine them, a woman who'd captured John's quiet devotion, a child who'd likely had his gray eyes, gone now, leaving him to drift through life like a ghost, working other men's cattle, sleeping in bunkhouses, carrying his grief like a stone. She understood why he'd stayed in Dusty Hollow now, when you'd lost everything. Sometimes you just stopped wherever you happened to be when the strength to keep running ran out. It didn't matter where you were. No place could be home when the people who made it home were gone. That night, she wrote in the journal she'd started keeping, "Learn to shoot today." Strange how something so simple can feel like such a victory. John Caleb taught me. He's a patient teacher, though I sense he'd rather be anywhere else. We're alike in that way, both of us just going through the motions, pretending we're living when really we're just surviving. But perhaps that's enough. Perhaps surviving is its own form of courage. She set down her pen and prepared for bed, moving through her nightly ritual of carefully undressing, avoiding the mirror, trying not to think about the ruined landscape of her body. Tomorrow, Mrs. Hutchins would return, and life would resume its normal pattern. The shotgun and rifle would go back to being precautions rather than necessities. John would return to being an occasional visitor, touching his hat and asking after her health. But something had shifted today. She'd held a weapon and learned to use it. She'd shared coffee and understanding with a man who knew what it was to lose everything. Small things, perhaps, but they added up to something larger. A sense that she might actually make a life here, might become more than just a woman running from her past. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, carrying the scent of coming winter. Sarah May pulled the quilts up to her chin and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own small victories and defeats. But tonight, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of hope. The sense that broken things might not be repaired, but they could still be useful, could still have worth. In the darkness, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for Mrs. Hutchins' practical kindness, for Danny's watchful protection, for John's patient teaching, for this place that asked nothing of her but hard work and determination, for the chance to become someone new, someone who could defend herself, someone who could survive. The wind howled louder, but the little room was warm and safe. Sarah May slept deeply, the rifle in the corner standing sentinel, a reminder that she was no longer as helpless as she'd once been. It wasn't much, perhaps, but it was a beginning. Mrs. Hutchins returned the next day looking frailer but in better spirits. The doctor had given her medicine for her cough and strict orders to rest, which she promptly ignored. "Rest is for the dead," she declared, examining her garden with a critical eye. "I see you've kept things well enough, though those potatoes could use more mulch." Sarah May had grown accustomed to the widow's gruff manner and took no offense. Over the following weeks, they settled back into their routine, though Sarah May noticed she was taking on more of the heavy work without being asked. Mrs. Hutchins noticed too, but said nothing, her pride warring with practicality. November brought the first hard freeze, and with it, news that would shatter Sarah May's fragile peace. She was in town for the weekly shopping when Mrs. Baxter from the hotel approached her outside Morrison's store. "Miss Fletcher, there's a gentleman asking after you. Well-dressed fellow from back east. Says he knows you from Philadelphia." Sarah May's blood turned to ice. "Did he give a name?" "Mr. Charles Worthington. Claims to be a family friend. He's taking lunch at Maggie's if you'd like to." "No." The word came out sharper than intended. "No, thank you. I have no business with anyone from Philadelphia." "Mrs. Baxter's eyes gleamed with curiosity, but Sarah May turned away, her hands trembling as she loaded her purchases into the wagon. Charles Worthington. She knew the name, knew exactly who he was and why he'd come. The question was how he'd found her. She drove back to the Hutchins place faster than was safe, her mind racing. Charles had been one of her most persistent suitors before the fire, drawn by her father's money rather than any real affection. After the accident, when the extent of her injuries became known, he'd been among the first to distance himself. So why was he here now? Mrs. Hutchins took one look at her face and demanded an explanation. Sarah May found herself spilling the whole story, the fire, the full extent of her scars, the way Philadelphia society had turned its back on her. "And this Worthington fellow was one of them that rejected you?" Mrs. Hutchins asked. "The first, he actually told my father that no man could be expected to accept damaged goods." The old hurt still stung. He made it clear that I was now unmarriageable. "So what's he doing here?" "I don't know. Nothing good, I'm sure." Her fears were confirmed the next day when Charles appeared at the farm. Sarah May saw him coming from the kitchen window, still impeccably dressed despite the frontier dust, still carrying himself with the arrogance of inherited wealth. "I'll send him away," Mrs. Hutchins offered, but Sarah May shook her head. "No, I'll face him." She met him in the yard, keeping distance between them. He looked exactly as she remembered, pale, soft, with a weak chin he tried to hide behind carefully groomed whiskers. "Sarah May?" He smiled as if they were old friends. "You're looking, well, what do you want, Charles?" His smile faltered at her directness. "Is that any way to greet someone who's traveled so far to find you? Your father is beside himself with worry." "My father knows exactly where I am. I write him monthly." "Yes, well," Charles adjusted his cuffs, a nervous habit she remembered. "He feels you've been out here long enough. Time to come home." "This is my home now." Charles looked around at the simple farm with barely concealed disgust. "This Sarah May, you're living like a servant. Surely you can't prefer this to what being hidden away in my father's house like a shameful secret being paraded before fortune hunters who might overlook my deformities for the right price." Color rose in Charles's cheeks. "That's unfair. Your father only wants what's best for you, as do I. You made your feelings quite clear after the fire." "I was hasty, shocked. I've had time to reconsider." He stepped closer, and Sarah May fought the urge to retreat. "Your father and I have discussed a business arrangement that would benefit both our families. Marriage would..." "No. You haven't heard the terms." "I don't need to. The answer is no." Charles's expression hardened. "You always were too proud. Look where it's gotten you, working like a common laborer, hands ruined, probably half-starved. How long do you think you can keep this up? How long before age and work break you completely?" "That's my concern, not yours." "Your father could cut off your allowance." Sarah May almost laughed. "What allowance I earn my keep here? Charles, $2 a week and room and board. It's honest work, which is more than you've ever done." "You'd choose this over comfort over security." His voice turned wheedling. "Sarah May, I know about your condition. I'm willing to overlook it. Not many men would make that offer." The arrogance of it, the assumption that she should be grateful for his reluctant acceptance, made her furious. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the tension. The lady said no. John Caleb stood at the gate. Having approached so quietly, neither had heard him. His expression was calm, but Sarah May had learned to read the subtle signs of his anger, the set of his shoulders, the careful way he moved. Charles turned, taking in John's work clothes and worn boots with obvious disdain. "This is a private conversation." "Not anymore." John opened the gate and entered the yard. "Miss Fletcher asked you to leave. I suggest you do so." "And you are?" "Someone who doesn't like seeing women bothered by unwanted visitors." Charles's eyes narrowed as he looked between them. "I see. Found yourself a protector. Have you?" "Sarah May, does he know about—" "That's enough." Sarah May's voice cut like a blade. "John, would you please escort Mr. Worthington to his horse? He was just leaving." For a moment, she thought Charles would argue. Then he looked at John, really looked at him, and seemed to recognize something that made him step back. "This isn't over," he said to Sarah May. "Your father won't accept this." You're throwing your life away.
My life, my choice.
She turned her back on him, a deliberate dismissal. She heard John escort Charles away, their voices too low to make out words. Only when the sound of hooves faded did she allow herself to sag against the porch railing. You all right? John had returned, standing a respectful distance away. Yes, thank you. She managed a weak smile. You have good timing? Eleanor sent me to check on that loose board in the barn. He paused.
That fellow giving you real trouble?
He wants to marry me. The words tasted bitter. Not because he cares for me, but because my father's offering a good enough price to make my defects worth overlooking. John was quiet for a long moment. Man who sees you as something to be bought doesn't deserve you. The simple statement, delivered in his quiet way, meant more than all of Charles's flowery protestations ever had. Sarah May felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. He knows things about me, things that would change how people here see me. We all have things we'd rather keep buried. John's voice was gentle. Doesn't change who you are now, doesn't it? He met her eyes steadily. You're the woman who works dawn to dusk without complaint, who learned to shoot to protect herself, who faces down trouble instead of running from it. That's who I see. The tears came then, silent but impossible to stop. John didn't move closer, didn't try to comfort her with touch, but his presence was steady, patient. When she finally composed herself, he handed her a handkerchief without comment. He'll be back, she said, or he'll send others. My father won't give up easily. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. He paused. You could give me his full name. Amazing how a few words in the right ears can encourage a man to move along. Despite everything, Sarah May found herself almost smiling. Are you offering to run him out of town? Offering to let folks know he's not welcome. Same result, less fuss. She considered it, then shook her head. No, but thank you. John nodded, accepting her decision without argument. He headed to the barn to fix the board, leaving Sarah May to her thoughts. She watched him work, steady and competent, and wondered what he'd think if he knew the truth. If Charles revealed her secret, would John still see her as the woman she'd become, or would he, like all the others, see only the scars? That night, she helped Mrs. Hutchins prepare supper in unusual silence. Finally, the older woman spoke. That city fellow looked like trouble. He was. Sarah May focused on the potatoes she was peeling. Someone I thought I'd left behind. Past has a way of catching up. Question is what you do when it does. I told him no. I'll keep telling him no. Good. Mrs. Hutchins added wood to the stove. You've made a place here. Don't let anyone take that from you. But as Sarah May lay in bed that night, she wondered if it was that simple. Charles knew her secret. One word from him, and the fragile life she'd built would crumble. The people who'd accepted her would turn away in disgust or pity. John would touch his hat and maintain polite distance, seeing her as something damaged beyond repair. She pressed her hand against the scars hidden beneath her nightgown. Charles had called them defects, deformities. The doctors had used clinical terms. Extensive scarring, contractures, disfigurement, but to her, they were simply part of her now. The price paid for 3 children's lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Charles wouldn't give up easily, and her father's reach was long. But tonight, she held onto John's words, that's who I see. Maybe it wouldn't last. Maybe the truth would destroy this fragile new life as thoroughly as fire had destroyed the old one. But for now, for tonight, she would believe that she could be more than her scars, more than a bargain to be negotiated between men who saw her as damaged goods. Outside, the November wind howled, winter asserting its claim on the prairie. But inside her small room, Sarah May felt a different kind of warmth, the glow of being seen, truly seen, as the person she was becoming rather than the tragedy she'd survived.
It wouldn't last. It couldn't. But for tonight, it was enough.
The Autumn Harvest Festival was Dusty Hollow's biggest event of the year. For weeks, Mrs. Hutchins had been preserving vegetables, baking pies, mending their best clothes. Sarah May had watched the preparations with growing unease. A public gathering meant scrutiny, questions, the possibility of Charles making another appearance. "You'll wear my blue dress, Mrs. Hutchins announced the morning of the festival. "It'll fit with a few tucks. I thought I might stay here, tend to things." The older woman fixed her with a stern look. "You've been hiding on this farm for 2 months. Time to show your face properly." "I haven't been hiding." "Haven't you? When's the last time you went to town for anything but supplies? When's the last time you spoke to anyone besides me and John Caleb?" The mention of John's name made Sarah May's cheeks warm. He'd been by more frequently since Charles's visit, always with some legitimate reason, a fence to mend, supplies to deliver, but she sensed a protective watchfulness in his visits. "I'm not good at social gathering," she said weakly. "Neither am I, but we're going." Mrs. Hutchins softened slightly. "Sarah May, you can't let fear rule your life. That Worthington fellow is gone, took the stage 3 days ago. From what I hear, you've got nothing to hide from." If only that were true, Sarah May thought. But she nodded. The blue dress was finer than anything she'd worn since leaving Philadelphia, though still modest by Eastern standards. She let out the sleeves to ensure they covered her arms completely and added a high collar she'd fashioned from lace scraps. The festival occupied the field behind the schoolhouse. By the time they arrived in Mrs. Hutchins' wagon, the celebration was in full swing. Tables groaned under the weight of harvest bounty. Children ran between the booths, and the sound of fiddle music filled the air. The sight of so many people made Sarah May's stomach clench. "Stop looking like you're heading to a hanging," Mrs. Hutchins muttered. "Smile. Pretend you're enjoying yourself." They found a spot for their contributions: pickled vegetables, apple pies, and a quilt. Sarah May had helped piece together for the auction. Almost immediately, women began approaching, curious about the Eastern woman who'd been working at the Hutchins place. "You're the one who was asking after that Hartley fellow," one woman said, not unkindly. "Terrible thing. Men who write false letters like that." "Yes, well, it worked out for the best," Sarah May managed. "Mrs. Hutchins has been very kind. Eleanor's lucky to have the help. Been worried about her managing alone." The conversations were easier than Sarah May had expected. These women were curious, but not cruel, more interested in sharing gossip and recipes than prying into her past. She began to relax slightly, though she kept aware of her surroundings, watching for any sign of Charles. "Miss Fletcher." She turned to find John Caleb standing behind her, looking uncomfortable in what was clearly his best shirt. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly. "John, I didn't expect to see you here. Don't usually come to these things, but—" He paused, seeming to gather courage. "There's dancing later. Wondered if you might save one for me." The request was so unexpected that Sarah May simply stared. Around them, she could feel the interested gazes of the townswomen, could hear the whispers starting. John Caleb, who never danced, who barely spoke to women, asking the Eastern lady? Yes, of course." His face relaxed slightly. "After supper, then—" He nodded and moved away, leaving Sarah May standing there with her heart racing. "Well, Mrs. Hutchins said, appearing at her elbow with a knowing look. That set the cats among the pigeons." The afternoon passed in a blur. Sarah May helped serve food, watched the children's races, even joined in the apple-peeling contest at Mrs. Hutchins's insistence. Charles didn't appear, and gradually she let herself believe he truly had left town. As evening approached and lanterns were lit against the gathering dusk, the musicians struck up dancing tunes. Sarah May watched couples take the floor, farmers and their wives, young courting pairs, even some of the older widows accepting gentlemanly turns around the floor. "I believe you promised me a dance." John stood before her, still looking uncomfortable but determined. Sarah May glanced at Mrs. Hutchins, who made a shooing motion. "Go on, I'll be fine here with the other old biddies." Sarah May took John's offered hand, aware of every eye upon them as he led her to the dancing area. The fiddles struck up a waltz, and John placed his hand carefully at her waist, maintaining proper distance. "I should warn you," he said quietly. "I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither am I. We'll muddle through together." He was better than he claimed, moving with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. Sarah May found herself relaxing into the rhythm, letting him lead her through the simple steps. Around them, other couples swirled, but she was aware only of John, the warmth of his hand, the careful way he guided her, the concentration on his face. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them." His gray eyes met hers. "Been too long since I danced. Figured it was time." "Why now?" He was quiet for a moment, navigating them around another couple. "Because you looked like you needed reminding that you belong here, that you're not just hiding out at Eleanor's place." The insight, delivered in his simple way, made her throat tight. "Do I belong here?" "More than that Worthington fellow ever could." They danced in silence after that, but it was a comfortable silence. Sarah May let herself enjoy the moment, the music, the movement, the feeling of being part of something instead of watching from the edges. When the song ended, John stepped back. Proper once more. "Thank you for the dance." "Thank you for asking." He escorted her back to Mrs. Hutchins, then disappeared into the crowd. Sarah May watched him go, aware that something had shifted. They'd crossed a line tonight, moved from careful acquaintances to something else. Something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "About time that boy remembered he's alive," Mrs. Hutchins commented. "Been walking around like a ghost for too long." Sarah May was about to respond when she noticed a commotion near the refreshment table. Charles Worthington stood there, clearly having returned despite reports of his departure. Worse, he appeared to have been drinking. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, voice carrying over the music, "I have an announcement that might interest you all." Sarah May's blood turned to ice. She started forward, but John appeared from nowhere, placing himself between her and Charles. "You were asked to leave town," John said, his voice carrying quiet menace. "Free country," Charles slurred. "Besides, these good people deserve to know the truth about who they're harboring. Only truth they need to know is that you're a man who can't accept no for an answer." John stepped closer to Charles. "Leave, now, or what you'll defend her honor." Charles laughed unpleasantly. "She doesn't have any honor left to defend. Do you know what she's hiding under those careful sleeves? What her body—" The punch came so fast that Sarah May barely saw it. Charles crumpled to the ground, hand to his jaw, blood trickling from his split lip. John stood over him, fists clenched, looking more dangerous than Sarah May had ever seen him. "Anyone else want to insult the lady?" John asked the crowd. When no one answered, he reached down and hauled Charles to his feet. "You're done here. If I see you near Miss Fletcher again, a split lip will be the least of your problems." Two men, friends of John's, apparently stepped forward to help escort Charles away. The crowd began to disperse. Though whispers followed in their wake, Sarah May stood frozen, aware that while John had prevented Charles from revealing everything, enough had been said to raise questions. "Come on, Mrs. Hutchins said firmly, taking her arm. "Time to go home." The ride back was silent. Sarah May stared at her hands, seeing again the shock on people's faces, hearing the questions in Charles's interrupted revelation. By tomorrow, speculation would be running wild. Her peaceful life here was over.
"Stop that, Mrs."
Hutchins said suddenly. "Stop thinking whatever fool thing you're thinking. So what if people wonder? Let 'em. You've proven yourself these past months. That matters more than whatever that weasel was trying to say. He was going to tell them about my scars, about what's wrong with me. Nothing's wrong with you that isn't wrong with half the people in this town. Everyone's carrying some kind of scar. Yours just happened to be visible. At the farm, Sarah May helped Mrs. Hutchins unhitch the wagon, then escaped to her room. She sat on her narrow bed, still in the borrowed blue dress, and tried to make sense of the evening. The dance with John seemed like something from another lifetime, before Charles had ruined everything. A soft knock at her door made her look up. "Come in." It was Mrs. Hutchins, carrying a cup of tea. "Thought you might need this." "Thank you." Sarah May accepted the cup gratefully. "I'm sorry about tonight. I've brought scandal to your door." "Scandal, Mrs. Hutchins snorted. "Girl, I've lived through Indian raids, droughts, my husband's death, and more gossip than you could shake a stick at. This hardly signifies." "John hit Charles because of me." John hit Charles because the man needed hitting. Been a long time since John Caleb stood up for anything. Good to see him acting like a man again instead of a ghost. Sarah May sipped her tea, letting the warmth spread through her. "What do I do now?" "Same thing you do every day. Get up, do your work, hold your head high. People will talk for a few days, then something else will catch their attention. That's the way of small towns." After Mrs. Hutchins left, Sarah May changed into her nightgown and sat by the small window, somewhere out there. John was probably back at his bunkhouse, nursing bruised knuckles. He defended her without hesitation. Without knowing what Charles had been about to reveal, that had to mean something. She thought about the dance, the careful way he'd held her, the simple declaration that she belonged here. For a brief moment, she'd believed it. Had felt like just another woman dancing with a man who'd asked her, not out of pity or obligation, but because he wanted to. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Charles might make another attempt to reveal her secrets, or the townspeople might draw their own conclusions from his half-spoken words. But tonight, she held onto the memory of gray eyes meeting hers, of strong hands guiding her through the steps, of a quiet man moved to violence in her defense. She'd been marked by fire, scarred in ways that would horrify most people. But perhaps John was right. Perhaps everyone carried scars, and hers were simply more visible. Perhaps, in this hard land that demanded strength over beauty, there was room for a woman like her. Perhaps. The autumn wind rattled her window, and Sarah May climbed into bed, pulling the quilts high. Tomorrow would come soon enough, with all its difficulties, but tonight she would remember the feeling of dancing in the lamplight, of belonging, if only for a moment, to this place and these people. It was more than she'd had in a very long time. The first snow came 3 days after the harvest festival, falling soft and silent across the prairie. Sarah May woke to a world transformed, the harsh landscape gentled by white. She dressed quickly in the cold room and hurried to start the kitchen fire, her breath misting in the frigid air. Mrs. Hutchins was already up, looking out the window with a frown. "Going to be a hard winter. I can feel it in my bones." They worked through the morning chores in companionable silence. The gossip from the festival had died down quicker than Sarah May expected, replaced by concerns about winter preparations and the latest cattle prices. A few women had given her curious looks in town, but no one had asked directly about Charles's interrupted revelation. It was just past noon when they heard the thunder of hooves. Sarah May looked out to see a group of riders approaching fast, John Caleb in the lead. Her heart clenched at his expression, grim, urgent. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped. "There's been a stampede at the Morrison Ranch, spooked by wolves. We need every hand we can get to round them up before we lose half the herd to the storm coming in." "Storm, Mrs. Hutchins squinted at the sky. "It's barely clouding over." "Blizzard moving in from the north. Be here by nightfall." John's eyes found Sarah May. "I know it's asking a lot, but we need help with the injured. Doc Harwood's already out there. but there's too many hurt cowboys for one man to tend. Sarah May was already reaching for her coat. What do you need me to bring? Bandages. Any medicines Eleanor's got? Blankets? He paused. It's dangerous. If you'd rather stay. I'm coming. Mrs. Hutchins was already gathering supplies. Take my wagon. I'll stay here. Keep the fires going for when you get back. Sarah May knows enough doctoring to help. They loaded the wagon quickly. John tied his horse to the back and took the reins, urging the horses to a pace that had Sarah May gripping the seat. The sky was darkening ominously, the temperature dropping by the minute. How bad is it? She asked. Bad. Lost count of how many men got trampled. Cattle scattered from here to Sunday. His jaw was tight. Should have seen it coming. Wolves have been circling closer all week. The Morrison ranch was chaos when they arrived. Cowboys limped or lay groaning, while others tried to organize search parties for the scattered herd. Doc Harwood, a thin man with perpetually shaking hands, looked overwhelmed. Thank God, he said when he saw them. Got more hurt men than I can handle. Nothing too serious yet, but if infection sets in... He gestured helplessly at the makeshift infirmary in the barn. Sarah May had helped at the charity hospital before the fire, had seen her share of injuries. She pushed aside her nervousness and got to work. Cuts to clean, breaks to splint, bruises to tend. The cowboys were stoic patients, more concerned about the lost cattle than their own pain. She was bandaging a young cowboy's ribs when John appeared at her side. I'm heading out with a search party. That storm's moving fast. Be careful. Something flickered in his eyes. Always am. He hesitated, then added quietly, You're doing good here. These men appreciate it. He was gone before she could respond, swallowed by the swirling snow that had begun to fall. Sarah May forced herself to focus on the work, not on the growing knot of worry in her stomach. The afternoon wore on, the storm intensifying. Wind howled through the barn walls, and snow piled against the doors. More injured men straggled in, half frozen and battered. Sarah May worked steadily, her hands remembering skills she'd thought forgotten. You've done this before, Doc Harwood observed, watching her clean a particularly nasty gash. I volunteered at a hospital back east before... She trailed off. Before doesn't matter out here. Only thing that counts is what you can do now. He handed her more bandages. And you're doing fine. It was near dark when she heard the commotion outside. The search party was returning, driving a portion of the herd before them. Sarah May rushed to the door, scanning the riders for John's familiar form. She spotted him near the back, slumped in his saddle. Even from a distance, she could see something was wrong. She grabbed blankets and pushed through the crowd to reach him as he dismounted. Just a scrape, he said, but his voice was strained. His left arm hung awkwardly, and blood had soaked through his coat. Let me see. She helped him to a clear spot in the barn, ignoring his protests. The coat came off with difficulty, revealing a deep gash along his upper arm and what looked like a dislocated shoulder. Steer caught me when we were driving them through Devil's Canyon, he explained through gritted teeth. Knocked me into the rocks. Doc Harwood appeared, took one look, and nodded to Sarah May. You handle the cut. I'll see to the shoulder. Sarah May worked quickly, cleaning the wound and stitching it closed with steady hands. John never made a sound, though she could see the pain in the tight lines around his eyes. When Doc Harwood wrenched the shoulder back into place, John's face went white, but he still didn't cry out. You're lucky, the doctor said. Inch to the left and that horn would have punctured a lung. Don't feel lucky, John muttered. Sarah May wrapped his arm in a sling, trying not to think about how close he'd come to serious injury or worse. You need rest. Can't. Still got men out there. The men are fine. Another cowboy interrupted. Morrison called everyone in. Storm's too bad to risk any more searching. As if to emphasize the point, the wind howled louder, rattling the barn doors. Sarah May realized with sinking heart that travel would be impossible. They were trapped here for the night, possibly longer. Mrs. Morrison, a practical woman with a no-nonsense manner, organized sleeping arrangements. The injured men would stay in the barn, watched over by Doc Harwood. The others would bed down in the bunkhouse or main house as space allowed. Sarah May was given a small room with 2 other women who'd come to help. But sleep eluded her. She kept thinking of John, injured and in pain in the cold barn. Finally, she gave up and slipped out, carrying extra blankets and a pot of coffee she'd brewed in the Morrisons' kitchen. The barn was dimmer now, most of the lanterns extinguished. She found John propped against a hay bale, awake despite the late hour. His face was drawn with pain he'd refused to show earlier. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly, not wanting to wake the others. "Shoulders complaining some." He accepted the coffee gratefully. "You should be resting." "So should you." She draped another blanket around his shoulders, careful of his injuries. "Does it hurt very much?" "Had worse." He studied her over the rim of the cup. "You did good today. These men won't forget it." Sarah May settled beside him, maintaining proper distance but close enough to talk quietly. "I was glad to help. It felt useful, like I was meant to do something more than just gather eggs and milk cows." "Nothing wrong with gathering eggs and milking cows. Honest work." "I know, but today reminded me that I used to be capable of more before the fire." She looked at him sharply. "How did you—" "The way you held back when that lantern got knocked over earlier. How you stay clear of the stove when it flares. And Worthington mentioned something about what's hidden under your sleeves." His voice was gentle. "Don't take much to piece together." Sarah May's hand went instinctively to her covered arms. "I see. Does it matter?" When she looked at him in surprise, he continued, "Everybody's got scars. Some show, some don't. Doesn't change who you are. You don't understand. It's not just my arms. It's—" She stopped, unable to voice the truth even now. "Sarah May." He said her name quietly, like a prayer. "Whatever you're hiding, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is who you are, and you're the bravest woman I know." "Brave," she almost laughed. "I'm terrified most of the time." "Brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what needs doing, despite the fear." He shifted, wincing at the movement. "Coming out here alone, starting over, facing down Worthington, helping today when you could have stayed safe at Eleanor's. That's brave." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the storm rage outside. Sarah May found herself studying his profile in the dim light. The strong jaw, the lines carved by sun and sorrow, the gray eyes that saw too much but judged little. "Thank you," she said finally, "for defending me at the festival, for everything." "Don't need thanks for doing what's right." Still, it meant something, means something. He turned to look at her then, and something passed between them in the darkness, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of kindred spirits. Sarah May felt her heart race and forced herself to look away. "I should let you rest," she said, starting to rise. His good hand caught hers, gentle but firm. "Stay, just for a bit. It's nice, not being alone." She settled back down, her hand still in his. It was improper, scandalous even, but in this barn full of injured men, in the middle of a blizzard at the edge of civilization, propriety seemed less important than human connection. They talked quietly as the storm raged, about small things, everyday things, the challenges of winter ranching, Mrs. Hutchins' stubbornness, the way the prairie looked under fresh snow, safe topics that skirted around the deeper currents between them. Finally, John's eyes began to droop. Sarah May gently extracted her hand and adjusted his blankets. "Sleep. I'll check on you in the morning." "Sarah May." His voice was drowsy now. "Whatever you're hiding, whenever you're ready to tell someone, I'll listen. No judgment. Just, I'll listen. She couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she simply nodded and slipped away. Back in her borrowed room, she lay awake thinking about gray eyes and gentle hands, about a man who saw her scars without seeing them, who offered acceptance without knowing what he was accepting. The storm would pass. They would return to their separate lives. She to Mrs. Hutchins's farm, he to his ranch work. But something had changed tonight in that dimly lit barn. A connection had been acknowledged, fragile as new ice but real nonetheless. Sarah May touched the scars on her arm through her nightgown and, for the first time in months, didn't flinch. John was right. Everyone had scars. Perhaps it was time to stop letting hers define her. Perhaps it was time to believe she could be more than the sum of her damages. Outside, the blizzard began to exhaust itself, the wind's howl fading to a whisper. Soon, dawn would break over a world made clean and new by snow. And maybe, just maybe, she could be made new too. Not unscarred, never that, but perhaps something better, accepted, scars and all, by a quiet man who understood that broken things could still have worth. It was a dangerous hope, but on this storm-tossed night, with the memory of his hand holding hers, Sarah May allowed herself to hope anyway. The weeks following the blizzard brought a tentative closeness between Sarah May and John. He stopped by the Hutchins farm more frequently as his shoulder healed, always with some practical reason but lingering longer than necessary. They would talk by the fire while Mrs. Hutchins dozed in her chair. Conversations that danced around deeper feelings neither was ready to name. December arrived with bitter cold that made every chore a challenge. Sarah May had grown stronger. Her body adapted to the hard work, but the approaching Christmas season brought an unexpected melancholy. This would be her first Christmas away from everything familiar, away from family traditions and comfortable certainties. She was lost in these thoughts one evening, mending by lamplight, when Mrs. Hutchins spoke suddenly. "You should tell him." Sarah May's needle paused. "Tell who what?" "Don't play dense. Girl, John Caleb. Tell him about the scars." "I don't see why." "Because you're falling in love with him, and he with you. And secrets have a way of poisoning love." Mrs. Hutchins's voice was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. "He's a good man. He deserves the truth." "He deserves better than damaged goods." The older woman snorted. "That again. You think John Caleb is some untouched youth looking for perfection? The man's been broken and rebuilt more times than a fence in tornado country. He knows about damage." Sarah May set down her mending, hands trembling slightly. "It's not just scars, Mrs. Hutchins. It's extensive, the kind of thing that would make any man turn away in disgust." "You don't know that." "Don't I? Charles took one look after the fire and couldn't get away fast enough. And he was supposedly in love with me. Charles Worthington is a weak fool who wouldn't know real worth if it bit him. John Caleb is cut from different cloth." Before Sarah May could respond, they heard a horse approaching. Her heart jumped, recognizing the familiar rhythm of John's mare. But when she opened the door, she gasped. John sat slumped in the saddle, one hand pressed to his side, his face pale in the moonlight. "Sorry to trouble you," he managed. "Got caught by rustlers out by Miller's Creek. Need some help." Sarah May and Mrs. Hutchins got him inside, revealing a knife wound along his ribs, not deep, but bleeding steadily. Sarah May's hands moved automatically, cleaning and bandaging while Mrs. Hutchins heated water for tea. "Should have been watching closer," John said through gritted teeth. "They got away with 20 head before we ran them off." "Never mind the cattle," Sarah May said sharply, fear making her voice harsh. "You could have been killed." "Takes more than a few rustlers to put me down." He tried to smile, but it turned into a grimace. "Though I'll admit, this stings some." She finished bandaging him, acutely aware of his bare chest, the old scars that marked previous injuries. He'd been hurt before, survived before. Mrs. Hutchins was right. He knew about being broken. "You'll stay here tonight, Mrs. Hutchins declared. "That wound needs watching, and you're in no shape to ride." John protested, but weakly. Soon he was settled on a makeshift bed near the fire, dosed with willow bark tea for the pain. Mrs. Hutchins retired, leaving Sarah May to keep watch. She sat in the chair beside him, trying not to stare, in sleep. His face lost its careful guard, revealing the vulnerability beneath. She thought about Mrs. Hutchins' words, about secrets and poison and deserving truth. "Can't sleep either." His voice startled her. His eyes were open, watching her in the firelight. "Just making sure you don't fever. How's the pain?" "Manageable." He shifted carefully. "Sarah May, there's something I need to say." Her heart clenched. "You should rest." "No, let me finish. These past months, since you came here, it's been like waking up. For 5 years. I've been going through the motions, working, eating, sleeping, but not really living. Then you showed up, all fierce determination despite being scared, and something in me started breathing again." Sarah May couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "I know you're carrying something," he continued. "Something that makes you pull back every time we get close. And I need you to know, whatever it is, it doesn't matter to me. You matter. Just you." "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered. "Don't I?" He reached out with his good hand, fingertips barely brushing hers. "You think I haven't noticed how you flinch from heat? How you keep covered even in summer? I've got eyes. Sarah May, I can guess. Guessing and knowing are different things." "Then tell me. Trust me." The words hung between them like a challenge. Sarah May stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, snow fell silent and deep, covering the world's imperfections in pristine white. If only it were that easy to cover her own flaws. "The fire was at a charity hospital," she began, not turning around. "I was reading to children in the ward when it started. The official report said I was heroic. Going back for the little ones, 3 children lived because of me. That is heroic. The price of heroism is high." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Burns over 30% of my body. Arms, chest, shoulder. The doctors called it miraculous that I survived. I'm not sure surviving was the miracle they claimed." She heard him shift behind her, but didn't turn. "The scars are extensive, twisted, the kind of thing that makes people look away in horror. Charles saw them once, accidentally. When my sleeve tore, he actually got sick. Said no man could be expected to want someone so disfigured. Charles is a fool." "Is he?" She finally turned to face him. "John, you're talking about caring for me, but you don't understand. This isn't just a few scars. I'm marked, damaged in ways that can never be fixed. Any man who saw, any husband would be repulsed. It wouldn't be fair to ask anyone to accept that." John struggled to sit up despite her protests. "Come here." "John." "Please, come here." She moved closer reluctantly, stopping just out of reach. John's gray eyes were steady on hers. "Do you see these?" He gestured to the scars on his chest. "Cattle horn, barbed wire, knife fight when I was young and stupid. This one," he indicated a puckered mark near his shoulder. "Bullet from a range war in Texas. I'm no prize. Sarah May, I'm just as marked up as you claim to be." "It's not the same." "Isn't it? We've both been through fire, just different kinds. Both come out the other side changed. Question is, do we let it define us, or do we define ourselves?" Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm scared." "I know. So am I." He held out his hand. "But maybe we can be scared together." Sarah May stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, with trembling fingers, she began unbuttoning her sleeve. She rolled it up slowly, revealing the network of scars that covered her forearm, red and white and twisted, pulling the skin into strange patterns. John's expression didn't change. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently traced one of the larger scars with his fingertip. "These saved 3 children." She nodded, unable to speak. "Then they're beautiful." His voice was rough. "Every one of them is beautiful because of what they represent. Courage, sacrifice, love." "You don't understand," she whispered. "This is just my arm. The rest will be just as beautiful when you're ready to show me. If you're ever ready. And if you're never ready, that's fine too." He caught her hand in his. "Sarah Mae Fletcher, I'm not asking for your body. I'm asking for your heart. The rest is just details." She broke then, sobs shaking her frame. John pulled her down beside him, ignoring his own injury to hold her as she cried for the months of fear, for the rejection she'd faced, for the possibility that maybe, impossibly, she'd found someone who could see past the surface damage to the woman beneath. When the storm passed, she found herself curled against his good side, his arm around her shoulders. It was improper, scandalous, but she couldn't bring herself to move. "I still don't think it's fair to you," she said quietly. "Let me decide what's fair to me." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm a grown man. Sarah Mae, I know what I want. Question is, what do you want?" What did she want? For months, she'd wanted only to hide, to find a place where her scars didn't define her, but somewhere along the way, want had shifted. Now she wanted this, the solid warmth of John beside her, the acceptance in his eyes, the possibility of a future that included love despite her damages. "I want to try," she whispered. "But I'm terrified." "That's all right. We'll go slow. No rushing, no pushing. Just possibility." They stayed like that until dawn lightened the windows, talking quietly about everything and nothing. When Mrs. Hutchins emerged from her room, she took one look at them and smiled. "About time," was all she said before busying herself with breakfast. John stayed another day until his wound had closed properly. When he finally rode out, he stopped at the gate and looked back at Sarah Mae standing in the doorway. "Sunday dinner?" he asked. "If the weather holds?" "I'd like that." His smile transformed his face, years dropping away. "Until Sunday, then." Sarah Mae watched him ride away, her hand pressed to her heart. She'd shown him the scars on her arm, and he hadn't turned away. It was just one step, the easiest revelation, but it was a beginning. Mrs. Hutchins appeared beside her. "Told you he was different." "He doesn't know everything. When he does, he'll love you just the same, maybe more, for trusting him with it." The older woman patted her shoulder. "That man's been waiting to live again for 5 years. You've given him that. Don't underestimate the power of resurrection, girl. For either of you." Sarah Mae nodded, unable to speak past the hope blooming in her chest. It was dangerous, this feeling. Hope had betrayed her before, but as she watched John's figure disappear into the distance, she thought maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. This time she'd found someone who understood that broken didn't mean worthless, that scars could be beautiful, that love wasn't about perfection but about choosing each other despite the imperfections. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. It was beginning. Winter settled over the prairie like a heavy blanket, transforming the landscape into something both beautiful and harsh. The small house that had become home to both Sarah Mae and John seemed to shrink against the vastness of snow-covered plains. But inside, warmth grew with each passing day. They had been married for 3 weeks now, in a simple ceremony at the schoolhouse with Mrs. Hutchins and a handful of friends as witnesses. Sarah Mae wore the blue dress from the Harvest Festival, altered to fit properly, and John had somehow procured a new shirt that made him look younger, almost boyish in his happiness. But now, on this December evening, Sarah Mae stood at the window of their bedroom, watching snow fall in thick curtains. Behind her, she could hear John moving about, stoking the fire, giving her the privacy she'd asked for. Tonight, she'd promised tonight she would trust him completely, would show him everything Charles had called repulsive, everything she'd hidden for so long. There's no rush, John had told her repeatedly since their wedding. We have all the time in the world. But Sarah May knew that full trust required full truth, and so tonight, with her heart hammering against her ribs, she would reveal everything. Sarah May, John's voice was gentle. I'm going to check on the horses. Take all the time you need. She heard his footsteps fade, the door close quietly. He was giving her space to change her mind, to retreat. Part of her wanted to, but the stronger part, the part that had learned to trust his steady presence, his unfailing kindness, knew it was time. She undressed slowly, each button a small act of courage. The mirror reflected back the truth she'd hidden, the scars that started at her left shoulder and swept across her chest like a violent abstract painting. Red and white, twisted and puckered, pulling the skin in ways that distorted the natural lines of her body. The doctors had done their best, but there was only so much that could be repaired. She put on her nightgown, a special one, Mrs. Hutchins had helped her make, with buttons down the front for easy removal. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and waited. When John returned, he knocked softly. May I come in? Yes. He entered, saw her sitting there. An understanding dawned in his eyes. He crossed to sit beside her. Not touching, just present. Are you sure? He asked. No, but I need to do this anyway. Her voice shook. I need you to see, to know what you've bound yourself to. Sarah May, please let me do this. With trembling fingers, she unbuttoned the nightgown and let it fall from her shoulders. The cool air hit her scarred skin, making her shiver. Or perhaps it was fear, or vulnerability. She couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see disgust or pity or regret in his eyes. For a long moment, there was silence. Then she felt the bed shift as John moved, but instead of pulling away, he moved closer. His hand, warm and calloused, gently touched her unmarked shoulder. Look at me, he said softly. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Sarah May, my brave, beautiful wife, look at me. Slowly, she raised her eyes to his. What she saw there took her breath away. Not disgust, not pity, just love, deep and steady and sure. Do you know what I see? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I see the woman who ran into fire to save children. I see courage that takes my breath away. I see my wife, who trusted me with this truth even though it terrified her. But it's ugly, horrible. No. His hand moved carefully, tracing the edge of where scarred skin met smooth. These marks tell a story of heroism, of sacrifice, of a woman who valued others' lives above her own wholeness. How could that be anything but beautiful? Charles is a fool who wouldn't recognize true beauty if it set his hair on fire. John's attempt at humor made her sob harder. Sarah May, I've been dead inside for 5 years. You brought me back to life. Do you really think some scars are going to change that? She couldn't speak, could only cry as he gathered her into his arms, holding her against his chest. He was warm and solid and real, and he wasn't pulling away. He wasn't running. He was holding her closer. I love you, he murmured against her hair. All of you, every scar, every mark, every part of you that makes you who you are. You saved 3 children. Sarah May, you're a hero. My hero. They stayed like that for a long time, until her tears finally stopped. When she pulled back to look at him, his own eyes were wet. I don't deserve you, she whispered. Funny. I was thinking the same thing. He cupped her face in his hands. We're quite a pair. Aren't we both of us thinking we're too damaged for love? Both of us wrong. She laughed then, a watery sound, but genuine. Mrs. Hutchins was right. She said you were different. Eleanor's usually right about things. He helped her back into her nightgown, his touch reverent rather than hesitant. Though, don't tell her I said that. Later, they lay together in the darkness. Sarah May curled against John's side, his arm around her. The storm outside had quieted, leaving the world hushed and white. I used to dream about fire, she said quietly. Every night, the smoke, the heat, the children crying. But lately, the dreams have changed. How so? Now I dream about coming home to you, about quiet evenings by the fireplace, about the life we're building. She pressed closer to him. Good dreams. That's not a dream, John said. That's our life, our real, everyday, beautiful life. And it was. In the morning, they would wake to chores and challenges, to winter's hardships and the endless work of frontier living. But they would face it together, two people who had found each other across miles and scars and losses, who had chosen love over fear. Sarah May thought about the woman who had arrived on that stagecoach months ago, desperate and alone, believing herself unworthy of love. That woman seemed like a stranger now. In her place was someone stronger, still scarred. Yes, but no longer defined by those scars. Defined instead by the love of a good man who saw beauty where others saw damage, who offered acceptance where others had given only rejection. John, she said into the darkness. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Thank you for letting yourself be seen. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the harsh landscape in gentle white. But inside the small house, two hearts beat together. Two souls scarred by loss had found healing in each other. It wasn't the fairy tale Sarah May had once dreamed of. It was better. It was real. In the morning, Mrs. Hutchins would come for Christmas dinner, probably making tart observations about young love while secretly wiping away tears. The townspeople would gossip, as they always did, but with less malice now, seeing how John Caleb had come alive again, how the Eastern woman had proved herself one of them. Life would go on, beautiful in its ordinariness, precious in its simplicity. There would be hard times ahead, because frontier life guaranteed nothing but challenges. But they would face them together, John and Sarah May, building something lasting from the ashes of their separate griefs. Sleep now, John murmured, already drifting off. Tomorrow's Christmas Eve. Eleanor threatened to teach you her secret pie recipe. The horror, Sarah May said dryly, making him chuckle. She closed her eyes, feeling safe for the first time in so long. The scars were still there, would always be there, but they no longer held power over her. Love had transformed them from marks of shame to badges of honor, from signs of damage to proof of courage. In the end, that was the greatest gift. Not that John loved her despite her scars, but that he loved her with them, seeing them as part of her story rather than flaws to be overlooked. She had come west seeking a new life and found so much more. Found home, found purpose, found love that didn't demand perfection but celebrated the beauty in broken things made whole again. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah May's last thought was a prayer of gratitude, for fire that had marked her but not destroyed her, for the journey that had brought her here, for John's steady heart, for Mrs. Hutchins' practical wisdom, for this life, imperfect but theirs, built on the untamed prairie where second chances bloomed like wildflowers after rain. She had asked if he'd still want her after seeing her scars. He had pulled her closer and shown her that real love didn't let go. It held tighter, loved deeper, chose daily to see beauty where the world saw only damage. And that, Sarah May thought as she drifted into peaceful sleep, was the greatest miracle of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Sarah May and John's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of love and redemption in the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support means the world to me.